Hi everyone, my name is Tom. As she said, I'm a language expert here at busuu. This is my first crap, so thanks very much for coming along to listen to me talk crap. As she said, I'm the something different speaker. I was supposed to go on last, I think, but I need to get back to watch Love Island, so I'm going on first. Also, I'm a linguist. I'm doing an MA in applied linguistics part-time. So the talk that I'm going to give is actually based on a paper that I wrote recently. Just as a quick show of hands, do we have any linguists in the room who speaks another language besides English? Okay, a few of you. So some of you might find this interesting. This is about global Englishes, that's the title. You might have seen a list like this before. This is the top 5 languages by number of native speakers in the world. No surprises here probably for number 1, that's Mandarin, with about 1 billion first language or L1 speakers. And then the next 4 in the top 5, Spanish, English, Hindi and Arabic. Remember, these are all first language speakers, so totals for first and second language might be a bit higher. Next, let's have a look at some numbers. Can anyone guess what these different numbers represent? This is a bit of a busuu presentation tradition. Throw some random numbers on the screen. Any ideas what these might represent in the blue shirt?
The countries with that as a first language?
Yeah, basically, I think you've nailed it. Yeah, it's very good. It's the top 3 languages by state recognition as L1 or L2. So that means these languages are official languages in those countries. As you can see there, English is a first or second language in 75 territories. So that includes Hong Kong, not a country. French is spoken in 29 territories, Spanish in 21. These are the top 3. So English is far and away out in front. Only English, also it's worth noting, is, as it says at the bottom, is represented on every continent. Obviously Spanish is mostly Europe and South America and a bit of North America as well. French, Europe, Africa, Canada, but English is on all the continents of the world. And this is why, as David Crystal says, English merits description as a world language. And because of this diversity of English, there is the question of who owns English. With some languages, say Japanese, it's very clear. It's spoken in one place. Same really for Italian, maybe 2 or 3 places there, but it's quite clear the majority ownership where that lies. But with English, it's not so clear. Of the world's 750 million to 2 billion speakers, there's a bit of disagreement about just how many English speakers there are in the world. So that's why we've got quite a big range here. Only about 380 million, so that's roughly 20 to 50%, speak English as a mother tongue. So by most measures, non-native speakers actually outnumber native speakers, which is quite unusual for a language. And today, because of this diversity, English most frequently serves as a lingua franca. So most conversations, and again, this is a little bit unclear whether we classify them as numbers of conversations or the amount of words that are spoken in the conversation, but most conversations, it's said, take place between non-native speakers of English. So English is working more as a lingua franca than it is, say, in my family, where it would be between native speakers. So because of this, another stat here for the data fans, David Crystal, who's quite a well-known linguist, reckons that only 1 in 4 users of English is actually a native speaker of the language, around a quarter. So it's been suggested, and some people find this quite controversial, that native speakers of English no longer own the language or have the right to set the rules of correct usage. And those people tend to argue that English should be seen as a global resource, a language that belongs to everyone in the world who speaks it, not only its native speakers. So with this sort of fresh outlook on English, which emerged really in the 80s, we get different conceptualizations of world English, different varieties of English. Some academics like to use the term Englishes, you know what they're like. One of them on the left, this was really the first model that inspired all the ones that have come since by Kakru in 1985. At the centre there's the inner circle. So these are native English speakers, mother tongue speakers, which, as it says there, includes the USA and the UK and the obvious others like Australia. And then the outer circle, countries like India and Nigeria, that's mostly former colonies of the mother tongue speaking countries. And then beyond that, you've got what's called the expanding circle, which is basically everybody else. So people learning English in countries where English has no native or colonial history. This model is quite widely used, and we sometimes refer to it at busuu when we're talking about the voice artists we use on our English dialogues. We mainly use inner circle voices, but recently we've tried to diversify and bring in more outer circle and expanding circle voices. One of the criticisms with the model, though, is that it doesn't really suggest there could be much movement between the circles. One model that sort of tried to deal with that a little bit is the Circle of World English on the right, Tom MacArthur's model, which puts world standard English at the centre, not really belonging to any one particular group of speakers. And then around that has the different varieties of English. I'm not sure quite how clearly you can see that, but you've got things like Australian, New Zealand and South Pacific English in the sort of 12 to 1 o'clock area. And then further out you've got other varieties. There's even one there, I think, Aboriginal English. So lots of different varieties of English. This is something that's really quite, this variety, level of variety is something that's quite unique to English. You don't get this even, say, with Spanish, where you might maybe see a fraction of the number of varieties mentioned here. But despite these efforts to recast English as a global resource, powerful language testing and publishing industries continue to see the standard English of native speakers as the most desirable form of English. And here there's on the left there's an excerpt from a course book called Straightforward Intermediate. I plucked this really at random, but most English course books for second language learners will tend to feature some kind of exploration of British identity or American English. They tend not to look at, say, Nigerian English. There's really, it's quite common really to see this focus on one of those inner circle Englishes. Some of you might be wondering at this point, why is that a problem? English originates, as the name suggests, from England. Maybe there should be some kind of standard. So here are some of the reasons why native speakerism, as it's called, might be a problem. One of the reasons is identity. The supposed superiority of native speakers' English might foster a sense of inadequacy or illegitimacy among non-native speakers. This is something that I encountered a little bit, I think, when I was teaching in China and in Japan. Sometimes people feel they're never going to reach that native speaker level, and it sort of lowers their sense of self-esteem sometimes when they're speaking English. Another issue with native speakerism is that the goal it sets is basically out of reach. Nativeness is an unattainable goal for many non-native speakers. Everybody's got an accent, so pronunciation is one of the big hurdles. Some people are never going to acquire a native accent. Sometimes the grammar's just, for some people, is just too complex as well. Another issue is disempowerment. The native speaker standard undermines the skills and status of non-native speaker English teachers. And another issue is history as well, especially in those outer circle territories that we mentioned earlier, places like India and Nigeria. English has a close association with Britain. In somewhere like the Philippines, it might be the US. And for speakers in those territories, English is often tainted by the legacy of colonialism. So that becomes the identity that is available to speakers of English in those places. So those are some of the issues with native speakerism. Implications for English teaching. One of the solutions put forward to those problems I just listed is a way of seeing English called English as a lingua franca. And some of the benefits, you might notice, sort of correspond directly to those issues we just saw. So for one, English as a lingua franca becomes a more motivating form of English. The traditional TEFL approach, or teaching English as a foreign language approach, sees deviations from native speaker norms as errors, and errors need to be corrected. But in English as a lingua franca, this approach sees English that differs from that of native speakers as possible evidence of creativity, an assertion of identity, or language change. And to give you an example, this is something that we're already willing to accept with American English. If Americans are talking about someone's birthday, and they might say something like, I wish I would have known, I wish I would have known it was his birthday, I would have gotten him a present. Things like, I wish I would have known, would have gotten, we might in Britain think that's non-standard. It might instead be, I wish I had known, I wish I had got him a present. But we're quite willing to accept American deviation from what we might call standard grammar, or for example, the spelling of the word colour in American English obviously doesn't have the U. Very few people these days would say that is incorrect. You'd have to be quite a die-hard traditional Englishman to say that is an incorrect spelling. So we're quite tolerant of differences there. But if you were perhaps speaking to a Nigerian person and they said something like, why you no go, rather than why aren't you going, we might think, that's incorrect English. So we do have kind of a double standard where different speakers of English are concerned. So English really, and variations on the norms that we accept, really can stand as examples of creativity, identity, and change. Another issue is that English teaching within the lingua franca context sets a realistic goal of intelligibility, not nativeness, and it targets communication in lingua franca context, so speaking to other non-native speakers, which, as we said, is where most English conversations happen these days. It's also empowering. Non-native speakers gain in status under this system of English as a lingua franca. They become role models, they can set a good example for their students rather than being non-standard speakers. And finally, it's a more forward-looking model, it's more internationalist, it's not a colonialist approach. It's got its critics though. Some people say that English as a lingua franca can't really escape the historical and political connotations of British and American English. When it's so similar, it's not radically different. Some of the differences that you see in English as a lingua franca are, for example, the dropping of the third person S. So she put the glass on the table instead of she puts the glass on the table. Those are some of the intelligibility features. So finally, what does this mean for us as English course designers at busuu? Well, we understand that many of our learners want to learn what they consider to be correct or standard English, but the problem with that outlook is that there really is no such thing. There's no globally uniform, neutral variety of English for us to present to them. There's a lot of variation, as we've already discussed. So when it comes to vocabulary and grammar, we teach a form of English that's based on the English you might find in the world's quality press, not just British papers, but papers in South Africa, for instance, New Zealand. While flashcards, those are the main way we teach vocabulary on busuu. They always come with an audio clip. Those in the early levels tend to be taken from inner circle voice artists, so English and American native speakers mostly. But now that we're revamping our B1 level, which is our intermediate course, we're trying to include more diverse voices that represent the range of English that's spoken in the world today. And we hope that that will be motivating for learners to see their own form of English represented on busuu. Thanks very much.